Well, for more, we're joined now by David Perlich. He's a Vatican analyst with CBC News. So, David, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Hillary.
So you were at the funeral mass for the last Pope. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this morning's service on what we saw at Vatican City today.
Well, I think we saw something remarkable in its own way today. There were the funeral mass for Pope Benedict XVI. 5,000 members of the clergy were present, cardinals, archbishops, priests, monks, members of other religious communities as well. Representatives of the Jewish and Muslim communities were there. But I think the difference was in scale and scope. In 2005, when John Paul II had died, a papacy, now St. John Paul II, it was a papacy that had global impact and significance. It was also over 25 years long. So he had strode large in the world. And when he died, somewhere between 4 and 5 million people came to Rome for that funeral. So people were lined up all the way from St. Peter's Square back down the main artery, Via della Conciliazione, towards the river. It was packed. They even had to set up additional viewing areas in other parts of the city. It was a significance of millions. Today, we are told from Italian police that somewhere around 50 to 60,000 people came to that square. I think there may have been more. But as Pope Benedict had requested, this was a simpler mass. Now, it was a requiem mass, and in such, it was a mass similar to any funeral mass, just on a much larger scale. And of course, as was mentioned earlier, the most significant aspect of this was that a current pope was the concelebrant in this mass today.
Mm-hmm. And on that point, of course, Benedict is remembered as thought of as for being quite conservative. Francis, sometimes viewed as being a little bit more liberal. So how did Francis, during this ceremony, during this service, how did he sort of bridge those two worldviews?
The homily today that Pope Francis delivered was about 7 minutes long, and he concentrated, rather than on the characteristics of Benedict himself, he concentrated on the gospel reading for the day. And that is something that Pope Francis tends to do with his homilies, is concentrate on the readings that are part of the service. He spoke at great length on the life of Christ, which was something very near and dear to Pope Benedict's heart. He was a theologian. He had written extensively on the life of Christ. And in this sense, Pope Francis was speaking about being a shepherd and the notion of shepherding your people, and some of the challenges that come, especially, I think the phrase to use, when good needs to prevail, how that can be a struggle for a shepherd. And then while it didn't go deeply into the life of Pope Benedict, and some may have wanted, he did end with a very beautiful phrase in which he said, he spoke of Benedict's wisdom, tenderness, devotion that had been bestowed on the members of the church over the years. And he ended with, "May your joy be complete," now that Benedict, of course, in Catholic theology, will be with God. So it was an interesting in that he didn't speak at great length about the personal characteristics of the man, but you could see how, as he was trying to frame the papacy and give it a context that I think Benedict himself would have deeply appreciated.
And David, of course, part of Benedict's legacy is the fact that he retired, the fact that he stepped down. So do you think that this has now paved the way for future popes, possibly even Pope Francis, to consider a step like that?
We know that absolutely. Pope Francis has publicly said that if he's no longer physically or mentally to carry the burden of the papacy, that he would step down. I think there'll be two things that Benedict in decades and potentially centuries to come will be remembered for. One, he's considered one of the greatest theologians of the 20th century, and his writings, as I said, on the life of Christ and other aspects of Catholic theology will be referenced for decades to come. The other is by stepping down, by placing the first pope in 600 years to actually step down. He changed the mechanism of the papacy. He changed the function and the possibility to the papacy. Pope Francis has said he would be willing to step down if he was no longer able to perform his function. And now that that is an option for popes, it has certainly changed the way that the pontificate can work. Of course, everyone was caught completely off guard, myself included, when Benedict stepped down in 2013. But now this is an option, and it's going to be an option for centuries to come.
David, thank you so much for your insight and your analysis this morning. We do appreciate it.
My pleasure.
David Perlich is a Vatican analyst with CBC News, and he joined us from Calgary.